Hey guys, it's Tessa. Like mentioned in the title of this video, today I am doing essentially a review for a couple of like hanging potted plants. I think at least 2 of them are designed for like you hang them in the mirror in your car. I don't drive, so I don't know what that mirror is called. But the mirror in the center front, yeah, that one. You know, people hang things there. Yeah, so 2 of these patterns at least. The rear view mirror is what it's called. But essentially 2 of these patterns are at least designed for that purpose. 2 of the patterns that I'm reviewing are made by the same person, but I've noticed from a couple of patterns I bought, even if they're from the same person, sometimes the way they're written is still fairly different. Like I bought a coaster pattern, and between 2 fairly similar coasters, there was quite a bit of verbiage change and formatting change, which kind of threw me off. And it was missing like certain key things that I felt should have been there. But anyway, the first pattern is the Pothos plant crochet pattern, and it's in a, well, it looks like a woven basket kind of deal. And the other one by the same person is the Drooping Leaves crochet pattern, and both of these are by I believe it's PHoaCrochet. You can find them on Etsy. The patterns are pretty much always on sale, it seems like. Both of these patterns on their own pre-sale are $4.68 US. And currently they're both on sale for about $2. It's $1.87. So that's really nice. Both of these patterns, just from doing a quick glance at them, are fairly thorough, which is nice. I have taken a peek at both of them. One of them I'm a little bit more concerned with regarding how the basket's done. I'm starting with the Drooping Leaves pattern, and we'll check in once I start the basket. Okay, so I've started the Drooping Leaves pattern. It says that essentially what's required is a super fine weight yarn. I'm using just a generic Lily's Sugar and Cream cotton, just the typical worsted. And it also recommends, at least for the yarn it's talking about, using a 2.5 to 3 millimeter hook. I'm using, I think it's a 3.25 or 3.5. I don't really remember. Also, this grippy here, I made it myself. Isn't that crazy? My Michaels is selling silicone beads now, so of course I had to grab a pack. And I've now decorated 5 hooks. And I have at least 2 more I'm decorating today, and I want to get a 4 millimeter hook so that I can have everything from a 3.25 all the way up to a 6.5 decorated, which I think would just be so cute. Because I personally prefer using metal hooks. I think I've talked about this before, where I mentioned that I don't really like using plastic hooks. The only 2 I have found that I have enjoyed so far are these plastic ones from Hobby Lobby. I don't shop there very often, but I happen to be in the area and it's the only craft store near me at the time, so I ran and I got some hooks. These are plastic, and I think they have a metal rod in the middle, because some plastic hooks, if you go like this, you can bend them and they just bend backwards, and this one has a lot of resistance, so I'm assuming there's a metal rod in there. Typically that's what's done with resin hooks as well. They put a piece of metal in it so that it has some sort of structural integrity. I don't know about wood hooks though, if they do that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, I don't really know. Anyway, I'm using a 3.5 and a typical worsted yarn, and so far we've just done the first 2 rounds of the basket, but I just wanted to show you kind of what that looks like. So there's no gapping, it's a little bit tight, but from the pictures it looks like that's kind of what you're supposed to be doing, because we end up using double crochets for a couple rows in the basket. In the picture provided, I'll put it here or something, you can tell that it's really tight and that there's no gapping whatsoever in the double crochet rows, like no space between each of the actual double crochets. And it also recommends having a stitch marker. I don't really see a point in that for me personally. And then it recommends cotton filling as well, or like polyfill. I'm going to actually use some weighted beads so that if I were to hang this up in my car or my husband's car, it wouldn't just like flip around a bunch, it would actually just sit as is. I don't know if I'll actually be hanging it in his car or anything, or if I'm just gonna hang it from like our ceiling or something. But yeah, I am now finished the pot portion. However, I'm a little bit confused on how it wants me to attach the strings, so that like part that makes it hang. because all it states is for hanging pot, continue crocheting, chain 30, make 3 of these, and tie it to the rim of the pot plant, and the distance between each of the hanging ropes is 12 to 13 stitches. But none of the photos in this pattern show the top. So I don't know if there's a loop at the top. I don't know if the 3 are just connected together. I don't know. I don't know. Looking at some of the reviews that have photos, some people just did more chains, it looks like, to create that loop, and then tied the ends of each chain together to kind of wrap around itself. I think that's what I'm gonna do. I'll let you know how that goes. Alrighty, so I finished the basket fully. I ended up just making, like I said, one of these about 10 stitches longer than the other 2. So 2 of them are 30 chains, one of them's 40. Folded it over, and then I inserted, or I did the final chain into the one of the matching loops on this, on the longer part of the first one, and then I ended up just twisting the ends around. I ended up just twisting the ends around the top here, so that it kind of looked like it was just tied off. I figured that'd be easier than trying to find a way to weave in the ends. So I found another issue with the pattern. Sorry if you hear any sounds in the background. My husband's playing a game. But I found another issue already in the leaves portion of the pattern. So it has us do a bunch of different variations of essentially, you know, leaving gaps, but also doing crocheting, like double crochets and things like that. However, it doesn't tell us how to finish off the final like space here, like the final one of these spaces, because it ends with double crochet 1, chain 3, half double crochet 1, chain 3, half double crochet 1, chain 3. But in the picture you can see that there are 7 total of these spaces here. So I don't know. I'm assuming it's just a like slip stitch into the final. Alright, so I finished all 6 of the leaves. The pattern doesn't really specify how many to make, so I made 3 with 5 sets of the leaves, and then I made one with 3, one with 4, and one with 6, just so that there's, you know, diversity in length and all that jazz. So all of these made, and then the only other problem I'm kind of going to have regarding the leaves is there's no real specification on how to connect them to the soil. Like I mentioned previously, I did the leaves first, then the soil, so I could connect them easier, because all it states is sew every droopling leaves into the soil, which doesn't really specify much, but I'm going to be essentially taking the ends, inserting them through the magic ring hole, and then finding a way to stick them in there and stitch them like that. I also started the soil. Essentially we're just making a circle, so pretty simple, pretty easy. It's the only one, or let me backtrack a little. This pattern's for like medium beginners. So if this is like your first time looking at a pattern, I would not recommend using one of these. As long as you have the basic idea of how to do like working in the round, so like making circles like this, or you have a general idea of how to start rows in rounds, then you'll probably do fine with this pattern, just because for the pot, so for this guy, it's specified at the beginning of that section, for every slip stitch you do at the end of a row, you're going to chain 1 to start the new row. But for the pot, or not, excuse me, not for the pot, but for the soil, it doesn't specify that. So I think you are just working one continuous, round instead. Kind of wish it would specify that just so it was more clear, but process of elimination will just tell you that's how to do it. Finished the soil, and I loaded it with some weighted beads instead of polyfill like I mentioned previously. And it looks fine. I'm starting to weave in the ends on the leaves, but it looks fine, except for when I pull back all of the leaves, you can see that this does not fit in here. It is so small compared to the basket itself. Like if you put these two side by side, This is so tiny compared to the basket. And I saw reviews saying to double up, saying that the pattern noted to double up the yarn on the soil, but that doesn't make sense because one, there's no comments stating to do that, and two, even in the pictures, there's no evidence that the yarn is being held doubled. So I'm not really sure what is wrong exactly. My guess, more than likely, or likely more than anything, it's a matter of I should be using a larger hook, but again, they only note to use a 2.5 up to a 3 in really light cotton yarn. So to some degree, that shouldn't be the problem either. Looking at the yarn they're using, it looks like they're using worsted acrylic. So I really am not sure what the issue is. I mean, again, it fits, it looks cute. It's just the fact that like there's so much space. So this whole section I'm pinching is all the extra space of the basket. I also did I did the double crochets in a slightly smaller hook, and even then, I just don't know what the problem is. Overall though, I'm gonna weave these ends in later, but overall, I'd give this pattern like a 6 or 7 out of 10. Let's say 6.5 out of 10. Overall, it's very thorough on all of the parts. However, it is missing things like how you would make a loop on the basket, or how you would hide these ends, or the issue with the soil, or the issue with the nondescriptness of how the leaves work, or how they're connected to the soil. It's all of these little things that kind of drops the overall score for me. But overall, it's a fairly easy pattern to follow. Again, if you're like an intermediate beginner, or beginner intermediate, I don't remember which way that's supposed to go, but if you're around that range, and you know things like picot stitches, single crochets, double crochets, and chains, you should be fine. It's just, yeah, it's like a 6.5 out of 10 though. It's just got issues, and unless you problem solve it yourself, you're kind of gonna be stuck. And now move on to the next pattern. Now we are on pattern number 2, which, like I mentioned, is by the same Etsy shop, the PHoaCrochet. And this pattern is called Crochet Car Pothos Plant. Whole mouthful there. But I actually have made this one previously and ran into a lot of issues, or some issues. And now we'll kind of work together and figuring out what the other issues are. Okay, so we've started the basket for pattern number 2. And I've already come across an issue. It states for rows 6 through 8, you continue doing this half double crochet, chain 1 all the way across for those rows. However, in the photos, it's very clear that you're doing the half double crochets in the chain spaces and then doing a chain space above the half double crochets. However, again, it states to do them exactly as done in row 5, which is what this row was. So it needs to be a little bit more specific on either stating just continue to go on top of each other, or it needs to have a row 6 which notates, you know, chain 2 instead of 1, and then half double crochet into the first chain space of the previous row and then continue, and then you'll just, for rows 7 and 8, you'll repeat row 5 and then row 6. One or the other just needs to happen because it's unclear currently how to do it unless you're looking at the photos where it's clearly skipping into the chain space. But we will finish this basket and I'll come to you because I know we're gonna have issues with the ties just like the last one. Gosh, so this basket has my hands dying. You can tell how red they are. I also have some injuries on my fingers, but like you can tell how red my hands are. So this basket had us double strand cotton yarn before that. The pattern notes that the only crochet hook you'll need is a 2.5. And then immediately we start the pot and it says to double strand your yarn and use a 3mm hook. If you're gonna use 2 hooks, just include both in the materials list. So now going back to it's double stranded, this hurt my hands so much. This hurt my hands a lot. I typically don't have a lot of issues with having to double strand yarn, but whenever it's cotton like this and it's a, you know, stiffer material, it hurts my hands a lot. It's not viable to do a lot of the time. I think this could have easily been done though the same way we did the last one, where we just add a couple extra rows, I'm thinking. Because if we look at this one, so if we look at this basket, and we lay it in my hand and we compare it to the size of this basket, overall, they're fairly the same. The only real difference is that this one's a little bit taller and very clearly more like squared off and even versus this one, which bevels slightly. But in theory, they're practically the same size. So I really think this one could have been done with just not double stranding the yarn and instead doing like 1 to 2 extra rows to compensate for the different type of stitches. Okay, so I ended up doing it my way. And it's got a little bit of issues, but it's fine. So I did it similar to how I did the last one, but essentially my change was I did 50 stitches up and then looped over at 15, slip stitch through the 15 mark, and then did my second, I did my second 30, and then I slip stitched across the single crochets to around that like third point, and then 30 stitches back up. And then we did something similar knot-wise, where I again slip stitched through that same point, and then I did a couple of kind of like slip stitches again over it or around it so it would secure itself, and threaded the excess end through this knot a couple times. So that should be secure. Alrighty, so for the second potted plant pattern, I finished the soil. And I will say that the soil sits so much better in this one versus the other pattern. Like it's not falling out at all, which is nice. And I'm wondering if that is partly due to we double stranded the basket, making it thicker using around the same size of rounds. Additionally, I started making some of the little vines, something about this pattern that I didn't mention in the previous one is the previous one doesn't really tell you a recommendation or really how many vines to make. Instead, it just says make them. This one, however, does say to make a total of 6, 3 having 4 of these little ivy pieces, and then 3 having 5 of the ivy pieces. I chose to do it a little bit differently because why not? Where instead I did only 3 little ivy pieces, but I increased and decreased my hook periodically so that certain vines are longer than others, like this one, while others are much shorter, like this one. But yeah, again though, with this pattern, just like the last one, there really isn't any specification on how to attach them. The only thing noted here is a picture that just shows you inserting your hook some point through the top of the soil, and I'm assuming slip stitching through the end that we've left, so these ends here, I'm assuming is what's happening. The only comment noted regarding sewing the leaves is sew every drooping leaves into the soil, which is the exact same comment that was on the other pattern, so I'm wondering if that was just copy and pasted. The other issue regarding the ivy is there's a pretty major spelling error where it's talking about how to make these little points essentially, and so it has you do a number of double crochets, a treble crochet, something called a picot stitch, and then you reverse the whole thing. But it instead notes to do the number of double crochets, the treble crochet, the picot, and then it says to do a single double crochet and then repeat the number of double crochets that we did on the other side, which doesn't make any sense. It doesn't sit right, doesn't look right, doesn't even match the photos. So I believe that point where after the picot it says to do a single double crochet, I believe that's supposed to refer to a treble crochet to actually make the point on the ivy. But yeah, overall, this leaf pattern is a little bit more clear. It still doesn't really tell you how to do the final slip stitches before you increase the ivy length or the vine length. Also, it really just tells you at the very end to do a couple slip stitches, so you can see that like right here. That's what I did, but then I also want a couple of them just did really tight chains just to increase the length as well to provide more variety. But yeah, so overall, it's a little bit more clear, but it's still having issues. I'm gonna connect these leaves, weave in all the ends, and come right back to you. I finished the yellow one again, or I finally finished it. I took a little bit of a break on it because I was working on something else. But for this yellow one, I ended up only making 4 of the little drooplings or hanging bits, whatever you want to call them. This pattern was a bit better than the first one. I'm still only going to give it like a 6.5, maybe a 7. The only thing it really specified differently was just how to actually do the drooplings. So it was more clear in my mind on how to make them. But again, it does have that spelling error, which again drops it back down for me. Overall, I'd give this pattern, this specific pattern, a 6.5 out of 10 for its like overall rating. And I think I said that this one here was a 6. They both hang up very nicely. I'm still trying to convince my husband to let me put one in the car. He does not want me to do this. But yeah, so I hope you enjoy this video. I'm going to include the Etsy shop's name in the description box, so if you do want to get this pattern or anything like that, you can search it up. But let me know what you guys think. See you next week.